Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's welcome Nevada Democratic Congresswoman Dina Titus. She represents Las Vegas, so she's... So you have a very unique perspective on sports betting and the role the federal government can and should play. But I want to start with kind of a bigger picture question in an election year. How has online betting changed the economy of your home state and your hometown? It must be a huge cultural shift, sea change. What has that been like?
Well, first, let me thank you for doing this. This is such an important topic, and tell you that if you want to know about gaming and the money side of it and how it benefits states, you can ask our state treasurer, Zach Conine, who is in the audience. So I'm glad to see him. He can keep me straight for whatever I might tell you. You know, after COVID, Las Vegas went from having 35% unemployment, the worst in the country, like Great Depression, to now being the fastest recovering. And a lot of that is because of tourism, hospitality, and gaming. Everybody wanted to get out and have fun, and so this is where they came. And that includes all aspects of entertainment and gaming. You know, one of the things that we have to tell as our story, and the gaming caucus that I co-chaired tries to do this to our fellow members, is how much gaming does contribute to the states. So many of the states were short of revenue after COVID, you know, money for schools. The federal government gave them a lot, but still the revenue was way down. And this gaming has helped to bring it back. You can look at New York as a good example of that, not just Nevada. So it's helped to fill those gaps that existed within states' budgets.
Looking to legislation on, online betting in particular, the SAFE Act is the name for the Paul Tonko sponsored legislation. He's a colleague. You have, however, called this bill, which he has introduced in the past, a bad idea. Can you talk about what kind of guardrails you might think are better ideas for the federal level, if at all, or if the state level is a better idea to start imposing any limits?
Well, for many years, gaming just kind of kept its head down and played defense. We didn't want the federal government looking at what we were doing. Better to have state regulation, because if the federal government got involved, they'd put in another layer of rules, and then they could possibly put in some taxes, and we want to avoid all of that. Now, however, that gaming has spread all over the country except Hawaii and Utah, and sports betting is in about 2/3 of the states, and Washington, D.C., we can no longer hide. And so if you look at legislation that's been introduced right now, there are about 6 bills that are on the agenda, and we are playing offense and defense. Now, the SAFE Act that Tonko has, and he chairs the Addiction Caucus, so you put it in that context, includes the previous bill that he introduced, which was against all advertising for sports betting. This bill now puts restrictions on advertising, but goes much further than that, calls for a big study. Now, you know, when they call for a study, that's always dangerous because you don't know where that's going to go, and it just becomes a foot in the door. Calls for those studies, calls for restrictions on advertising, but also restrictions on when you can gamble, how much you can gamble, when you have to stop gambling, those kinds of things. I don't think that's the way to approach it. I certainly support responsible gaming. The industry does. They've taken bold steps going back to the 90s to regulate themselves. And I think that's better, to have self-regulation or state regulation, not have the federal government get involved at this level.
One particular public health related issue that, Tonko has discussed, but is kind of a specific state level question right now, is indoor smoking in casinos. Casinos are one of the few places left in America where you can still smoke indoors. And in New Jersey, casino workers are currently trying to ban it, citing the public health effects. Would you support a similar ban in Nevada? Do you think anything else should be done, if not a ban?
Well, this is something that the state legislature has looked at off and on. And again, you find the industry regulating itself. If you go anywhere practically on the Strip with all the new casinos, they have the very latest technology. It's not the low-ceilinged, old-time places that are so smoky that you find a few left downtown, but they've done a pretty good job. even some of the slot machine banks have filters on the side that suck out the bad air. So I would challenge you to go in places like that and find that it will be a very smoky atmosphere. But secondhand smoke is certainly something to take into consideration, not just for customers, but for employees.
So, do you hear from constituents at all who are concerned about this, being exposed on the job?
Well, not lately because of all the improvements that have been made. And, and this is an issue that the union, the culinary union, is very influential in politics in Nevada. And so if they make it an issue and get the state legislature engaged in it, I think you might find some movement on it.
Interesting. To pivot back to the Gaming Caucus, which you mentioned you are a co-chair of, obviously legislation like Tonko's and the others that are on the table are one part of what you do. Tell me and us more about what else the Gaming Caucus does. Is there an awareness raising aspect to all of this?
Well, there absolutely is, because gaming is new to many jurisdictions. And also where it exists, it's not like Las Vegas, my district, where it's everything. It's like a little piece of the economic pie, and it's a small part of employment. But two things, often members of Congress don't realize what the contributions of gaming are, whether it's in constructing the facility, hiring people at good wages, entertainment that brings folks from other places, ancillary businesses, and tax revenue. And you have to kind of lay all that out for them. This is what gaming will bring to your community. Second, they don't realize just how complex an issue it is. There is so much regulation of gaming. I mean, many layers, local, state, federal. You think the federal government's not involved, but think about the IRS, the Treasury, Indian Affairs, Commerce. There's lots of different layers. And so people will come to us and ask us questions about how exactly does it work. And so we provide not just advocacy for the industry, but also a real education function. Now, my co-chair is from a state where you just have small gaming, kind of in rural communities. So we kind of bring both ends of the spectrum to bear.
Interesting. To go back to Las Vegas, your home base, for a moment, there was a time when pro sports kind of avoided Las Vegas, but now it's the fastest growing sports hub in the US.
Right.
It's hosting the Super Bowl, NFL, NHL, MLS teams are flocking to the area. What has that been like, that reversal for you back home?
Well, we say if it's happening in District 1, because all of that is in my district. We have the stadium, we have the Aces. How about those Aces? I mean, they're fabulous. Yes, they deserve applause. But they are flocking there. And it's bringing a new set of people to visit. You can imagine all the general aviation and the special jet planes that come in privately to these events. F1 races coming up here in about a month. That's another group of people. The Raiders finally won a game. They're bringing people. I can tell you that these are new folks. The Raiders are not the ballet crowd. When they have a tailgate party, get ready. So it's you're right. It is a whole new dynamic. We were gaming, then we became a foodie town. Now a shopping and entertainment town, and now a sports town. We're getting a baseball team. That's really moving fast, and I'm sure that basketball won't be far behind, men's basketball.
How has it changed how you think about online gaming and gaming in general, if at all? Because obviously a lot of these games people are betting on.
That's right. And that's fine. We want to see that, and we encourage it. And it's not just betting in Las Vegas. It's betting everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but 38 states, I think, or a number of states. When sports betting first spread, and we started to hear a few scandals about some of the different teams or some of the different players, we sent a letter from my office. Jeremy Marsh does our gaming. Some of you may know him. If not, you should get to know him. To all the leagues and the NCAA, because this is a college issue too, saying, what are your policies when it comes to betting in terms of your team members, the people who work for the staff? How do you assure us that the bets will be honored and that the games will be fair, because we don't want people betting on themselves or cheating or anything like that. There have been some scandals, and there was a good response from all the leagues, and I think they have kind of cleaned up their whole efforts. They've made them more transparent. They've pushed for more annual education of their whole operation, so they know what the policies are, and when somebody violates a policy, they enforce it. And I think that's the key. If the scandals that make the news show that the system is working, but we want to stop it before it happens. If they were to continue, then there would be more pressure for the federal government to get engaged, and that's something that we want to avoid if we can.
Fascinating. One other aspect of all this that one version of the Tonko bill did address is AI. Proposing guardrails on how AI is used to sort of give online bettors particular advantages or moments. Are you concerned at all about this? I mean, there's a lot of talk about AI in general and imposing guardrails, but specifically for online betting, does that keep you up at night at all?
Well, AI period keeps me up at night, because you can see how it's used in politics. You can make anybody look like anything and say anything, and so in sports betting, who knows where it goes. I think that's one of the challenges that gaming is facing. You know, it's a whole new world, whether it's iSports or AI or Bitcoin. You know, the regulatory field is wide open in these areas, and I think it's going to be a challenge that we'll have to address. I think that advertising, when Tonko and some of those want to eliminate advertising because it entices people to come and gamble, I think you're looking at that half full, half empty. Advertising, I think, is a good thing in the sense that it lets people know which are the legal, legitimate sports betting sites, because a lot of people may not know that they're betting on some illegal site. You know, you just go on the internet and 1,000 pop up. So if they have slightly better odds and they're convenient, then people will use them. If they see advertising and they know which ones contribute to responsible gaming, guarantee the results, you know you're going to get paid, you're not going to get ripped off, I think that is a plus for advertising. So as we look at regulation, let's keep that in mind.
Interesting. To totally switch gears for a moment, because it's a big issue in your state and in politics right now, both presidential candidates have proposed taxing tips. Removing the taxes on tips for service workers. Now, big issue in Las Vegas, in your home state. They're very different proposals, the Trump and Harris campaigns. Where do you fall on either of these versions? Trump's being probably a little more expansive, and have you talked to the Harris campaign about your views at all on this?
Well, it's hard for me to say which I support, because I don't think either one of them have fleshed out the details. I mean, we don't know really how they're going to make either one of them work. I have come out with a position that I would support no tax on tips if you accompany that with a raise in the minimum wage, because a lot of people don't make enough tips to get taxed. You're just talking about the high-end rooms and the people who make the big tips. Maybe some housekeepers don't make very much tips, so they're not going to benefit from this. So if you're looking at something that really benefits people, you've got to accompany that with an increase in the minimum wage.
And that is something, yes, you're right, nothing's been fleshed out firmly, but the Harris campaign has.
And in Nevada, you know, in some states you have a lower minimum wage for tip earners, because the assumption is that the tip will make up the difference. That's not true in Nevada. Over the years, going back to the culinary union and the role that hospitality plays in the Nevada economy, we have eliminated that gap.
Interesting. And while we're on the subject of your swing state, care to offer us any assessment of where things stand in Nevada? And is this a neck and neck race?
Well, you know, you're right. Nevada is a swing state. It's a purple state. It's always been, you know, we're very independent. Don't get on my farm or ranch and don't come in my bedroom. But people are ticket splitters in Nevada. You'll have a senator who's a Democrat, a governor who's a Republican, or vice versa. That's been a tradition for a long time. And races are won very small margins. Catherine Cortez Masto won last time, I think, by like 1% or even less than 1%. So we will fight to the last day for the last vote, knocking on the last door, and not take anything for granted. I can tell you, though, that the national race for president has gotten closer. Trump was way ahead of Biden, depending on the polls, 7 to 10 points. And now most of the polls show that Kamala Harris and Trump even in the national polls. Our Senate race shows the Democrat is ahead, and the 3 House races have not been targeted by the Republicans, because even though they're close and they're frontline races, they seem to be doing better on the Democratic side, and the Republican candidates are less well funded and less well known.
Mm-hmm. To move back to gaming, thank you to the audience for indulging my slight pivot to national politics. In the gaming caucus, do you have sort of a personal conversation? I'm curious with colleagues, because everybody's trying online betting these days. I mean, I imagine even members of Congress. Do people ask you, how does this work? Tell me how to do it. Does it get like that?
Well, I think they figured out how to do it. Sometimes they might ask for my advice of who they think's going to win, but I'm not very good at the prognosticating. So the conversations usually don't get to that level. But you're right, everybody's doing it. I heard a question earlier about young people. How do you get responsible gaming information to young people? And the answers were, I think they call it touch points and all that. You should also not overlook working with our colleges and universities to get that information out. I think that's an important addition to that.
That's interesting.
But I would say Asia Wilson, you can bet on her anytime.
You heard it here first, guys. Going back to the Tonko bill for a moment and its proposed limits on advertising, it all goes back to, as you mentioned, he is a chair of the Addiction Caucus. Have you had frank conversations with him or other colleagues about this being something you care about, and the idea that the industry might also be willing to have a discussion?
I have. He's a friend. He and I came in the same class, so we've known each other for a long time. He feels very strongly about this, and I think he's well intended. I think he's just misdirected, because he doesn't have a real sense of how the whole system works. So, I've talked to him about it, but this is a good example of how there's still a stigma against gaming, even though it's spread so far and it's so legitimate now and it creates so many jobs. You still have to watch your back in legislation. You may find a little piece here or a little piece there that discriminates against the industry. There's still a little bit of stigma, and it's pretty easy to kind of attack. It's just like sin taxes. Go after the sin taxes first. And you find that. I just made a list. There are, we're talking about we kept our head down and didn't want to see much happen. But right now there are 5 major pieces of legislation pending out there. There's the slot tax, raising the cap on slot winnings. There's the sports betting. There's advertising. There's a lot happening in this world. Now, as far as Tonko's bill, it's partly a messaging bill. I don't see it passing, certainly not this session. Probably nothing's going to pass this session, but we don't want it to get ahead of steam and going forward.
I mean, there's also the revenue question that you raised too, right? I mean, is it a concern for you that the longer these bills sit out there and the more bills there are, then suddenly gaming becomes like an easy extra revenue source the next time you want to offset something in a few years?
Well, remember when states started first looking at gaming as a way to fill those financial gaps, because state legislatures don't want to, raise taxes. So it was lotteries. They were looking at lotteries as going to be the kind of fund education. What happened was that lotteries didn't pay off to the extent that they thought they would. And also state legislatures then didn't use lotteries as supplemental funding. They used it as replacement funding. So we want to be sure that that doesn't then move on to other kind of gaming at the federal level, because they're always looking for something to grab.
As a congressional reporter, yes, there's always a new idea to raise revenue. If you could talk about the slot tax in particular, just your views on that one bill, since I don't know if the audience is familiar.
Yeah, I was thinking that did it have an acronym? No, GRIT is the acronym for the opposition. Let's see. Jeremy, do we have an acronym for the slot tax?
Congress loves its acronyms.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'm clever enough to come up with an acronym, but anyway, the slot tax would, when it was put in place, it was to be used for going after illegal gaming. And so the only people who paid it were Nevada and then a little bit of New Jersey. So I decided, well, where is this money? How much is it and what are we using it for? So we called called Treasury and the IRS and said, what's going on with this? They couldn't even find the money. They didn't know where it was. It had just gone into the general fund. So I thought, well, why would we have a slot tax if it's not being used for what it was intended for? Or if we had a slot tax, it should go back to the states. So this bill would eliminate that 0.025 slot tax on handle, but also there's a $50 head tax on every employee. So what you are doing is putting a burden on the legal sports betting and, you're putting a burden on, and well, now I've gotten the sports betting and the slot tax confused. When you put the tax on the, all right, let me start over.
We're good.
You see, this is confusing. That I've even gotten it confused. You take the 0.25 off the handle and the $50 off of the employee for the sports book.
Off the per head tax for employees, yeah.
For the sports book. That's that. Now, the slot situation is where you are taking the cap off what you win in a slot machine. So let's keep those two separate. You got the sports betting issue with that tax and the slot machine issue with raising the cap on the win, so that you aren't reporting to the IRS until you hit $5,000 as opposed to $1,200, which has been a cap in place since the 70s.
Fascinating. I would spend a lot more time talking about this, but we are out of time. Congresswoman,
well,
thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Bennett.
All right,
it was a real pleasure.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.